welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time today to focus on this very important aspect of the fundraising mix. As I think you all are aware, not-for-profit organizations who have their boards engaged in fundraising are more successful and reach their goals more often than not-for-profits who don't have their boards involved. So today we're going to be discussing the whole question of board fundraising, the responsibilities of the board vis-a-vis this, and look at the points on both sides of this debate on whether the board should be involved in this way. We'll also discuss in very detailed way how you can help your board. Melissa's going to give you lots of wonderful tips, information, scripts, and so forth to help you actually get your board up and out in fundraising and helping them actually do it very, very well. So let's just move into that debate now. Are boards supposed to be fundraisers? Is this what should it be included in their responsibilities? So let's look at the folks on the no side of this debate and why they say the board does not need to be involved. First of all, they say that the board exists to govern, not to raise money. In other words, their main responsibility is the overview of the organization, the governance, which is, a full job in itself, and that actually if you add fundraising to this, the board actually, the good governance gets choked off. And so they're very much in an either-or situation. Either you can do good governance or you can do good fundraising, and a board that's trying to do both is not going to succeed, is a lot of this particular viewpoint. Right from the get-go, they feel that fundraising focus impacts the way the board is recruited. In other words, they're looking at people with personal wealth or connections instead of looking at them in terms of their skills that could be helping the organization, the industry, their willingness to work on the project, their willingness to work for the organization, their motivation, why are they there. If it's a lot about personal wealth and interaction with other people of that ilk, then that might be their motivation rather than the motivation focused on the actual, social issue or group of people that your not-for-profit is trying to serve. And that a fundraising focus in terms of recruiting the board that you will not, as a not-for-profit, also look at how good is this person at actually governing? How well do they do in managing people? Do they understand the issues of a not-for-profit organization? Do they understand how to bring volunteers together and stuff? All the kinds of things that go into making somebody good at governance. The feeling is on this particular side of the argument that if you're looking at somebody from the point of view of how much they can give, then one might ignore these other very important aspects to the kinds of things that a board member can bring to an organization. Also, they feel that if the board itself is focused on fundraising and they're successful at that, this might be misconstrued as, in fact, a successful board, when, in fact, they may not be succeeding in terms of their governance and in terms of the not-for-profit's social impact. Just because an organization is good at fundraising doesn't mean that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing in terms of fulfilling its mission. And that this side of the argument feels that the focus on fundraising, in fact, takes away the focus on using social impact as the measurement of success, both for the board as well as for the organization. And frankly, that it just takes up too much of the board's time to be focused on fundraising. And, they may want, in fact, people on the board who may not necessarily be wealthy or connected, but because they are a good representative of either the clients or the community, that they have a particular skill or some other attribute as a board member that they can bring when they don't have high wealth or a high wealth network. Will these kinds of board members, which are also needed on a balanced board, will these kinds of board members be ignored? So most not-for-profit CEOs, most heads of not-for-profits know that their board members are not comfortable directly asking for money. And so again, this becomes a bit of a mountain to climb and a tension between the board and the senior executives of an organization and the board itself. So the question is are these legitimate concerns, or are these simple excuses to avoid what most people feel very uncomfortable with, which is asking for money? I think we have to say that the concerns are very valid, particularly around the governance issues and the balance between governance and fundraising. But I do believe that they are that none of the concerns that are listed here are insurmountable, nor in a cost-benefit analysis should they prevent your board from having a strong foundation fundraising focus, and in addition to governance and the responsibilities and priorities that brings. So let's look at the side where we're talking about yes to board taking on the full responsibility around fundraising. I think the bottom line here is what I said in our introduction, and that is that boards of not-for-profits that fundraise, when they're fully engaged in this way, the not-for-profit succeeds more often at reaching its fundraising goals than organizations where the board isn't involved. So let's just look at this in detail. It's a healthy sign for board members to make a commitment to the organization and its mission. I know they're doing that on terms of volunteer, but in our culture, we very much measure a person's level of commitment as well as their level of valuing and something that they are doing by the financial commitment. So this is a very healthy sign when somebody gives this kind of commitment. Also, it makes them simply more vested in the not-for-profit in that they have invested financially as well as with their time and their focus. In terms of the fundraising being an important part of governance as opposed to versus governance, fiscal responsibility for the organization, of course, is an important part of what the board is doing, as well as their ability to set policies, set the organization's values and practices and ethics within fundraising and vis-a-vis fundraising, as well as setting the goals as part of an overall strategy for the organization. So the board needs to be at the table for all of this, and this is part of the fundraising responsibility. So the fundraising responsibility, we're sort of widening our definition of that. It's not just about going out and getting dollars or asking for dollars. It's about the whole fundraising process, if you will, and being a part of that as an organization in order to have the kind of financial stability that is an important part of a sustainable organization and makes it possible for an organization to actually reach its mission and vision and fulfill that. So the increased rate of success for not-for-profits who involve their board in this larger view of what fundraising is definitely succeed. So I think you can see very clearly here that one of our major points that we're trying to make with you today is that there is this kind of separation, almost like a church and state separation between money and programming. And we want to bring that into alignment, that the resources, such as financial resources, as well as obviously human resources and so forth, are an important part of the organization's ability to fulfill its mission. And instead of separating them, that the two of them need to be working in concert together. So how do we achieve this? We need to get our board on board with this kind of understanding, with this kind of thinking. So one needs to be really upfront with board members right from the get-go when you're recruiting them on how much it actually costs for every aspect of the organization's operation, how much it actually costs to run the programs, to serve the community in this way? And then how does fundraising work in the not-for-profit sector? Many board members coming to a not-for-profit organization are coming from the for-profit, the corporate, other sectors, and they don't actually understand how fundraising works. And it's our job as not-for-profit managers to educate them on how a not-for-profit actually functions and how fundraising plays a part of it, and then how they as board members can be a part of making that happen for your organization. And you may have very specific ways that you want them to be involved and to be really upfront with them about that. So reframing fundraising as a necessary, a wonderful, a very important part of how they are serving the organization as board members, and then to integrate the money conversation into every discussion that you're having about the organization, always looking back at what resources are needed, what financial resources are needed in order to make that happen. So you can be exploring lots of different ways in our greater definition of how a board can help with the fundraising. They can be involved and look at it board member by board member and individualize how that board member can contribute overall and value every type of contribution that board members make towards the financial success of the organization, get them excited and engaged and moving through. So one way to do this, of course, is through education, and one of the best ways to do this is to involve them in the case for support process, do an actual miniature case for support process where you're going through and articulating who the organization is, what it is that they're doing, and how they're serving the community, so that when they go out, they have in their own words, as well as the words that you provide for them, they have in their own words a really clear presentation of the goals of the organization, its purpose, how it's going up, its strategies, and its impact and its successes. Provide them with all the materials they need, scripts, rehearse them if they need it. They should be able to go out and be able to speak about the organization and feel like they can answer any kind of question. You know, when you're implementing your fundraising plans, set manageable and realistic tasks and endpoints that they can meet. You know, add meetings and do full information reporting so that they can really be responsible every step of the way in terms of the fundraising. So this requires a lot of work from the staff, of course, to support the board through this whole entire process. And I just wanted to say, as fundraisers involved in a very strategic, systematic approach to fundraising, let's just look at where the board fits into that. So you're not changing as it were, the overall systematic approach that you have to fundraising, and you have one because you know a systematic approach raises more money, it's more strategic, it builds and continually improves. So how do you fit the board into this process? I think the major places that they fit in are in identification, in helping you find foundations that are likely to give, in helping you cultivate those foundations. As you know, one of the strange aspects of foundation fundraising particularly is that the person who's asking for money doesn't know the person they're asking money from, and the person who is being asked for money doesn't know the people who are asking them for money. This is an unusual circumstance in fundraising. Well, your board can really help you in opening doors and getting to know these foundations before you ask them for money, and also in helping them, the foundation, engage and get involved with you as an organization and get to know you before you ask them for money, before you send in your request for a grant. And then, of course, once the grant is in fact given, it's continuing to build that relationship inside stewardship kind of process that a board member can be very helpful in. So as you can see in this diagram, the staff are the ones that are doing the actual qualifying, the checking to see if the foundation is really appropriate in terms of giving interest and where they donate. The staff are the ones that are doing the actual soliciting and foundation fundraising in terms of writing either the letter of inquiry or the proposal. But the board is playing an integral and very important role in terms of building the relationship all the way along the line. So identifying prospective foundations, the first step. I think we've gone over a lot of these points already as far as how you're leveraging those relationships your stakeholders have. Wanted to mention that you can go 2 steps removed. So it might be somebody your board member knows who knows someone who can give you the kind of access that we're talking about here in terms of identifying, again, researching your organization's funding history, see if there's any connections there. And, of course, utilizing a database such as Foundation Search or some of the others in terms of actually a database that's relevant to what it is that you're trying to do. And in this case, it would be foundation fundraising that can provide you with analytics of the donors as well as historical information, and also has a reporting and prospect managing component to it, so that you can be tracking all the way along the line and analyzing and improving your process as you go. And, you know, really the stakeholders are there to help you expand your current level of connections. I'm going to pass the mic, as it were, over to Melissa, who's going to give us a lot of details in terms of how you go about doing this. So Melissa, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us today and doing this presentation. I think your mic is still muted.
Okay, this is Melissa, and I really am glad to be with you all. Thank you for joining, everyone. It's great to be part of this transcontinental or transnational presentation. As Shuddy talked about, the
sorry, Melissa, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I can barely hear you, and I imagine if I'm this way that others are too. Can I ask you to just start again at the top? And I'm sorry?
We did a sound check earlier. It worked just fine.
Yeah, I know, but I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. I can barely hear you. Can you move the mic piece or some other aspect around?
Is that any better?
It's a little bit better, but you're going to have to sort of talk at full volume. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, I am sorry. This worked this morning. I'm sorry. Is that any better? Can people hear?
It's not. It's not. Let's see. Are you on a headset or on your handheld?
Exactly the same equipment Fanny and I tested earlier. I am so sorry, everyone.
Okay, so maybe you could switch equipment then. Can you switch to a handheld?
Let's see if this works.
That works. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, everybody. Sorry
strange.
about that. Okay,
yeah, no,
go ahead.
I do apologize. So, deep breath. Let's start again, Shuddy. Thank you for giving us the background about some of the considerations when we engage the board in fundraising for institutional donors, specifically for foundations and corporations as well. So if you use the databases that are available, you'll get some prospects, but then you need to find out if your board members already know any of those people. So of course you show them the names. You show the names of the staff, you show the names of the boards of directors on the foundations that you're considering. They might also bring to you some ideas of a funder, and then or a person they know, and you can work backwards and find the boards that person is on. You want to ask them not only about their current connections or about people who are now on the board or staff of a foundation, but also some historical information. They might know somebody who was there 5 years ago. And as Shuddy mentioned, there's that 2-step remove. That person who was there 5 years ago would know somebody who's there now. So that's also very helpful, and you need conversations to do that kind of work, usually one-on-one with a board member, not in a small group, not 30 people all at once. You have to ask, because if you just pass around pieces of paper, the kind of triggering that happens when people think about something. It doesn't occur. They just glance and they pass it on. So it's really just in a conversation. You also are not asking who they know, not just who they're linked with, but also where there's enough mutual respect where your board member will carry that conversation forward for you. So my phrase is not linked but liked. So just keep that in mind. If somebody says, yeah, I know him, but I haven't talked to him in 20 years, or he ran away with my brother-in-law's wife, it's not a good connection. You also have that's another reason why you have to have those conversations. You also have situations sometimes where more than one board member has a link with an institutional funder, a foundation, or a corporation. And again, through conversation, you determine which one is the best person to make the contact now with the organization. And you work one link at a time. Foundations really dislike having multiple constituents of theirs come at them all at once for the same organization, representing the same organization. So strategically pick the person who has the strongest link first, or maybe the weakest link first, and then move up to the strongest. But think about it deliberately and have a conversation about that. But why do we do this in the first place? Why does board cultivation work? One of the key reasons is access. Your board members can widen your network. They can introduce you to people that you don't already know. And when that happens, the organization, the funder, the corporation, or the foundation gets knowledge about your organization. It's a way to transfer information and knowledge back and forth pretty easily when you have people talking with each other. It also gets you more attention automatically. If John talks to Jeff and they know each other already, Jeff is going to pay much more attention than if some letter comes in through the mailbox. It's just how people are. It's not just foundations. All of us pay more attention when somebody we know approaches us. It's also a way to build more interest in our work. John and Jeff are having a conversation, and they can discuss it and pursue questions and share interests. So it's really vital to have this level of access where that conversation can stimulate interest to follow up further. Of course, all of this requires that John and Jeff know each other already, that you've done the work, you've had the conversation to determine where your board members have personal links with funder representatives, either a board member or a staff member, and then your job is to help your board member create that access, set the appointment, have the conversation, and so on. So that's one of the key steps that we look for in when board members are engaged in fundraising. There's another reason we ask board members to help us with fundraising with institutions, and that's the notion of signaling. This is the notion that we recruit for our boards people who are genuinely committed to our work. And sometimes those people have such standing in the community, they're so respected in their field, that when they speak, people trust them automatically. It's that old commercial for an investment house. That trust is already there based on their position in the community. They also, because they're so well known, they're not only trusted, but they're believed. They're really reliable. If they're the good housekeeping seal of approval for which organizations in our communities are doing the kind of work that the funder might be interested in. So they might not know the funder already, but their voice is a very powerful signal of our work and the importance of our work. They might be able to communicate our impact tremendously effectively. They might be people who are rooted in the community that we're serving and be able to tell the story in a more compelling way. So they're signaling the importance of our organization's work. It's a very different function than the access function. The board member doesn't have to know the funder already. The board member has to be well known in the community or have a prestigious position. I have that in quotation marks because it might not be one of high prestige in terms of wealth. It might be high prestige in knowledge or in terms of the service level that they provide or their known commitment to certain populations in the community. And that person's willing to make connections on behalf of our organization with prospective funders. So two distinct functions: access, the connection exists already between the individual and the funder, as signaling. The individual is speaking on behalf of our organization and his or her voice carries such weight that it helps the organization get more attention automatically. So how do you do this? It all sounds great in theory, Melissa, but what do you do? Well, you have to find the links first. There's absolutely no way around it. You have those conversations, you use those databases, you do that research, and you map out of the funders you want to reach, who has links to them, and then you have to research each foundation and determine its style, because sometimes an individual style or what we need done won't match what the funder wants, and I'll talk about that in a minute. When we got those two things set up, who knows whom and what the foundation style is, then we can set up and follow a cultivation plan with our board member. So it's information first and then set up a plan. And that plan, of course, will have all the staff work for follow-through and documentation. If your board member is going to make a visit, you're going to prepare the board member, you're going to follow through, and then you'll document whatever happens. You might want to consider, as you set up your plan, what some of the possible steps could be. And here's just a few ideas that you could put into your plan. Your organization might be sending invitations to the foundation staff or board members to tour your facilities, to if you have a major announcement coming up. That's standard. We all know we do that pretty much automatically if there's a funder we want to be interested in us. But those invitations can be issued personally by a board member. So your board member becomes the contact person, not just send it in the mail. But John emails Jeff and says, I really would like you to come to this event. That can be one way to do it. You want to have interaction with your spokesperson, whether it's your board member or staff person, before you submit a grant request. You need sometimes it's personal visits between board members and foundation officials. Sometimes they know each other socially, and you prepare your board member to have a conversation at a golf outing or social event, so that there's already some kind of conversation going on. And you plan that so that your board member feels prepared and confident when he or she is in that situation. And part of that planning is to stress that your board member is not asking for money. Just as Shuddy showed on the graph, the board member is part of the cultivation process, not the solicitation process. The staff actually submit the proposals. And this is a little bit different from major gift fundraising. So sometimes it's a transfer of thinking for us to help the board members do the cultivation and the staff does the giving. But it's very helpful for board members because they can be involved without having to be on that front line where some feel very uncomfortable. So let's talk a little bit about when I said the funder style, what do I mean? There's several different styles, and sometimes it's hard to assess. So you do your best using everything that you can find and make your best judgments. There's several different kinds of funding styles, and one is that the foundation itself is a giving vehicle for a donor or a family of donors. In that case, there's often no staff. It's the board members of the foundation or family members who are making the giving decisions, who are receiving any requests. Sometimes it's considered a pass-through funder. Pass-through is the grants that the foundation makes are based on how much money people put in the foundation in the first place. So Jennifer and Joe might be putting $100,000 in the foundation in 2012, and then in 2013 they'll make grants of $9,999 and not keep any assets. So that's pass-through funding. You can tell that by looking in the databases and in the U.S. in the IRS Forms 990 to see what's happening there. It's very likely that a foundation that's being used as a giving vehicle like this with no staff or that has hints of pass-through funding doesn't accept unsolicited proposals at all. It's not a certainty, but it's very likely. So that's an instance where you're going to need access to that funder. If they're not accepting proposals, you have to get to their attention through access to even be on their radar. Another type of funder is one that's endowed. There's actually a corpus that's invested in and family members are choosing to make grants from the interest that's generated from the endowment. Sometimes as a staff, it might be a family member. It's relatively small in many cases. This type of foundation with an endowed foundation might or might not be accepting proposals. It might be a group that operates a lot like the top style and not accept proposals at all. Or it might be a group that does take proposals. Sometimes they're very geographically restricted based on where family members live. So you have to make sure you meet the criteria. but there is a staff and you have a way in. Some cases, we talk about an endowment as a foundation, but it might actually be a donor-advised fund at a community foundation or in one of the nationally and internationally sponsored community donor-advised fund organizations. There are some that are household names, Schwab or Fidelity or two, but so you might not be looking at a foundation itself, but you might hear about a donor-advised fund or part of a community foundation that operates like this. There's an endowment, and there are family members who help decide about the giving. In that case, you also need access. The signaling doesn't hurt, but you can't even submit a proposal in most cases until you have some kind of access to that particular funder. There's another set of styles as well where there's more staff. Large endowed foundations, again, there are household names. In the U.S., I can think of a couple. I know the Kresge Foundation makes grants in the U.S. and Canada, so that's one that would be a staffed foundation. And in this case, the board sets the direction and approves the grants, but there's actually program staff who do the legwork to find the proposals that are going to move forward to the board. In this case, that signaling function is really important because you have access already. You submit a proposal following the criteria, but the signaling gets you the attention of the staff maybe a little bit above, a little faster than somebody who's just sending a proposal in online or through the mail. And then there are corporate foundations or corporate giving programs in some cases. And in these instances, the company interest is served by the funder. The funder is really working on trying to meet some overall corporate goal, and there are many, so you need to read what they write and follow that. And then they are likely to have some staff, but that staff has divided loyalty and also works for the company, which gives you other ways of reaching the staff, in part through your corporate connections. So keep those in mind as you develop where those peer-to-peer links are. If there's no staff at a foundation, then you need a board member to be one of your advocates. And maybe your CEO will be involved as well, but it's a peer-to-peer relationship. It's the donor and somebody at the board level or the leadership level in your organization. And that your board member is going to be building trust, promoting access, signaling your organization's capacity. If there is staff at a foundation, your peer-to-peer might be at a staff level. It might be somebody on your staff who knows somebody else at a staff level in that foundation. That's fine. You also could have a board member who could promote access and who can generate that signaling function for you so that your foundation gets some attention. These aren't hard and fast rules. These are some categories to think about as you develop your plan, as you move ahead in how you cultivate foundation funders and involve your board. So as I said, you plan, you implement your plan, you document your work so that when you get that perfect job and move to Tahiti, somebody else can follow up on the groundwork that you've laid, and then whatever you agree to, there's follow through. So you don't let things fall through the cracks. These are basic fundraising principles in any type of fundraising, and they apply here too. So when you plan, you have to read everything the funder publishes, absolutely everything they publish. And you also have to understand it's their money, their rules. You might not like the rules, you might not agree with them, but if you want to make an application to them, you need to follow their rules and know what they are. You need to focus on your goal for cultivation. Are you trying to get access to the funder, or are you trying to signal to the funder? And that will determine strategically which board member is the best person, what the conversation looks like. And then you want to develop a plan that fits their rules, their money, their rules, and helps you move toward your goal. And that plan can have several different steps, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those as we move along. So as you implement the cultivation plan, you have to give your board member a chance to get used to this whole idea. Most board members don't like this. So one thing that you can have them do is start making thank you calls to prior funders. And they'll start getting that sort of positive feeling, oh, people really like when they hear from us. And so then they'll be more engaged. It's a very simple strategy to give board members an easy task to start with. And then you guide your board member through the process, at least for the first few times. This is brand new stuff for many people. And so they need some support from you as they go. And what does that mean, that kind of support? You help set the appointments. You send them reminders. You give them support. You give them scripts. You let them role play with you or with another board member. Anything you can do to help build their comfort. And you assure them that you will be following up and that you'll be debriefing with them at the end so they know that they're reporting back to the organization in an official capacity. So part of the documenting is you have to be sure that anything you write down, the board member involved or the funder could read any time without blushing. Not for a second do you want them to blush. You don't want to use any rumors or any unverifiable information. That seems common sense, but the things I see in donor records they make me blush, and I don't even know the people. So be very careful about this. And you want to create searchable fields. So what does that mean? That means you want to use your database as a way to capture information so that you can find and sort on funders that you might want to contact in the future. So you might put in what type of contact they like. Do they like email, or telephone, or a visit? Do they want a letter or a proposal? You might say whether you already have a link and what that link is. You have a code for it. We have a link, it's a board member. We have a link, it's a staff member, so that you can sort on things. You might have dates for when they're opening up their next proposal cycle. The next proposal cycle opens in August. You're going to want reminders in April that you need to start working on that funder. Whatever will help you search your database to find funders that you've already researched or you might have already developed a plan so you can move to the next step. And those are just a few ideas that I could come up with working on this. The follow-through, as your plan gets implemented, you're going to follow up with your board member. You're going to get a debriefing or report almost immediately when you when the board member finishes with the call. Whatever the board member said your organization would do, do it. Now, the board member said, oh, we'll get a proposal to you tomorrow. That's not within reason, so maybe you won't do that. And then you educate your board member about why that's not a reasonable request. But if it's within reason and it's within your organization's the ethics and guidelines that your organization has set up, you honor the board member commitments to the funder. Recognize that access meetings, you probably can do that once and you're done. The signaling might take several meetings. And part of your plan should be to set up a process so that the board member is disengaged by the third meeting and your CEO is now in charge of the relationship. That gives your board member success and lets that person move off and work with other funders, and it puts the cultivation of the relationship between two organizations firmly in the hands of the CEO, which is where it belongs in the long run. So the board member helps, and then the CEO takes over. So here are a couple ideas for scripts. This is the part where board members really, really like a lot of support. First, you have to know what the purpose of the conversation is. Are you asking your board member to make the introduction? Or are you asking your board member to signal your organization's capacity and trustworthiness? And that will help, and maybe both. And then you devise a script for your board member accordingly. You stress that you are not asking the funder for money. Your board member is asking the funder for advice. Much easier request, and board members feel much more comfortable with it. You encourage your board member to listen, and we'll talk in a minute about what the board member listens for. And then you have to help your board member understand when enough is enough, to stop the conversation and move on to something else. So here's an example of an access conversation. Hi, I'm Melissa Brown. I want to introduce you to this great program. My friend is shaking my hand, and she's going to say, oh, yeah, sure, tell me about it. I'm on the board at Vancouver Art Gallery. We think we're the best place for funding from your foundation because whatever the right answers would be that would fit that funder's interest. I'm involved with the Vancouver Art Gallery because it's the best art gallery in the region. They have some really outreach programs, whatever the right answers are. I'd like to know the best way to work with your foundation. A program officer, what's the best way to get in touch with the right person at your foundation? That's my advice. I want that piece of advice. Or I might ask, do you know somebody else who might be interested? It's not a good fit for us. Then my follow-up question could be, who else might be interested? How would I reach that person? When I get the answer, what's the best way to get in touch? I'm done. Thank you very much. I appreciate your advice, and then I move on. We start talking about our kids or the latest books we read or whatever. I don't need to belabor the conversation. I don't need to draw it out. So you can help your board member practice this, have some role play with other board members so that your board member feels very comfortable with why the organization is a good fit for the funder's interests, what the organization's main activities are, and why that board member is involved. Now, there's another kind of conversation, as you could guess. There's the signaling conversation. So here, I'm a community leader, and I'm on the board at the Homeless Initiative Program. And we're already working with a program officer at your funder. In this case, we've already started a conversation. We think this is really important work because we address the problems that cause homelessness, and we help people end this cycle. This matters in our community because we've seen homelessness, in this case, increase by X% every year. How could we work with your funder? What would be the best way to proceed? And here's an important question. Is there anything you can tell me that will help us understand this funder's giving better? This is where you're asking for advice. You're signaling the organization's work by talking about the high impact and why it matters to the community. And the advice you're asking for is the best way to work with that funder. And again, the conversation ends when you have your answer. We really are thankful for your help, and you move on. If you can work with those two kinds of conversations with board members, then they will be powerful advocates, not only with your funders, but with your potential major gift donors and others as well. You also need to coach your spokespeople about listening to what funders say. Sometimes when a funder says, no, you're not a good fit, the funder means, no, you're not a good fit. And it's okay. If you ask that question and you hear that answer, you've saved everybody a whole bunch of time so that you just don't work with that funder anymore. You say, thank you so much. Do you know anybody else? And you move on. Sometimes no means not right now. We haven't seen increases in the stock market. We don't have open grant cycles right now. We're in the process of reevaluating our strategic giving. Statements like that indicate there might be an opportunity in the future. So then you ask your board member to gingerly clarify when the situation might change. How could we find out? What's going on? To try to get some answers back about what might be up with that particular funder. So distinguishing between no means no and no means not right now is one of the things that you're going to prep your board member for. The board member might also get questions like, oh gosh, that's so interesting. Can I hear more? Or really intriguing approach. How did you guys come up with that? If the funder is using words like that or hinting at interest, it's time for the board member to say, just how would you like us to keep in touch with you? Would you like visits? Would you like us to send newsletters? Would you like to be on our mailing list? How can we best inform you about our work? And then this is where the board member might make a commitment. Sure, we'll put you on our mailing list. And then you need to follow what the board member said and make sure that organization gets on the mailing list. So there's the key question in both conversations is, does the funder representative want to know more about your project or your organization? And if yes, what are you going to do? What has the board member committed that the organization will do? Providing more information, more follow-up, whatever. So you need to know from the board member, what did you commit to? And then you need to schedule some kind of contact. And foundation officers tell me that no more than every 3 months is fine. They don't really want to hear more often than that. They have enough going on. You don't call to chat. You actually focus on new developments. So if you're talking about a specific project, you don't just say, oh, hi, it's nice to see you. Hi, we got new grants. Oh, we expanded into a new territory. Oh, we just reached our 10,000th student. Oh, whatever it is. You focus the communication on specific achievements. So when you debrief with your board member, does the funder want to know more? What did you promise we would do? And then what should we do based on your impressions? The funder might give some kind of subtle hints, and your board member might have some interpretations of what those mean. So those are the things that you want to focus on, have your board members focus on and practice in the role play. The best role play is with other board members, sometimes with leadership staff people, so that there can be some give and take, so the board members actually get to rehearse some of the answers that you've been helping them develop. This presentation is based in part on some research, as Shuddy mentioned, and here are some of the resources that I used. Some of the data comes from the Nonprofit Research Collaborative. There's a website called nonprofitresearchcollaborative.org, which you're welcome, of course, to use. I've also used material from the Fundraising School, where I do teach a course. Bloomberg Business Week does have some free corporate data about connections between board members in the corporate world, which can be a great resource, and it does cover North America. I've also been talking with foundations for the last several months on behalf of Metasoft and Foundation Search in order to come up with ways that foundation officers like us to contact them. And a lot of this content comes from that. And then as Shuddy mentioned, the board source, the governance index, just came out actually last week. And it has some information also about engaging board members in fundraising, how and why, and activities that can be very helpful in getting that done. So that concludes my remarks. So I'll now pass the baton over to Shuddy again, and she'll close.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Melissa. That was really great, and really appreciate all the information that you've shared with us today, as well as the resources for further development on our own. I just wanted to say, in conclusion, that utilizing your board as part of your fundraising process is very labor-intensive, as you can tell from the kind of details that Melissa was sharing with us. We have provided you with a checklist that allows you to, sort of move through the process, know what you're supposed to be doing at every step, and we've sent that along with the materials. We'll send it again when we send out the materials after today's webinar. And I just want to say, in weighing the trade-offs here between the amount of work that it takes to be able to involve the board in this way, as well as, the general aggravation in terms of managing this process with people, as opposed to, sort of managing it on your own, weighing that against the fact that not-for-profits who do engage their board reach their goals more often than those that don't. The fact that it does give the whole organization a part in the process of the foundation fundraising and any kind of fundraising, really, as well as the benefit of making it really, focused in terms of a systematic approach that you're going. So when you weigh those two things against each other, I think you'll agree that the overall, the trade-offs are worth it. It is worth involving your board in this way. The way that when I was managing an organization and working with the board in this way, is if I thought about it as sales management, this helped me really get clear what it is. And just like when a sales manager for any kind of organization, any kind of company, profit, not-for-profit, is managing a team of people, a lot of the kind of management skills need to be brought to the table. So you need to bring skills like people management, knowing that, really clear goals, all the information and so on that the team needs to be supported in actually achieving that goal. You need to support them, motivate them all the way along. This, of course, is a very delicate way of going about this, because there are bosses. The board members are the governance for the organization. So you're trying to lead from behind, which can be a very, very delicate thing to do. And so perhaps one of the ways to mitigate that aspect of it is to pick one or two board members who have the kind of management skills, have the respect of the other board members who are good, and they have the skills of a sales manager, and make them work closely with those one or two board members, turn them into the actual fundraising manager, and then have them do the mentoring, the teaching, the supervising, if you will, of the sales team, that is the board members. One other aspect of this management tip that I wanted to give you is that you might even divide your board into teams, and maybe they're going to particular kinds of foundations, and bring in a little friendly competition. Bring in a little friendly, gamesmanship in this in terms of setting goals for each team and working through that together. Again, this can be very labor intensive, but it just works. So it's a very worthwhile process to go through. So, okay, well, we're going to go now to the question and answer period. Before we do that, I just wanted to mention to you that this is the second in our series of webinars about relationship building. We have two more, one in 2 weeks and another in 4 weeks. The next one is getting more grants by developing relationships with funders. This is all the kinds of ways that this is the staff side of relationship building with foundations, as well as a lot more information from the research that we've been doing, that Melissa's been doing for us as a company, speaking directly with foundations and learning what it is that what they're looking for, what it is that they need from not-for-profit organizations. And then the last in this particular series is about stewardship, getting the next grant by giving your funders what they need. So what we really want to help you with in this one is to get out from under the outcomes, results, domination of that relationship and get into building a very real funding partnership with your foundations that are giving to you. And so we're going to have a lot of tips on how to go about doing that. So wanting to open it up now to questions. I'll ask the questions, and then either Melissa will answer them, and if I have anything to add, of course, I'll add to that. But please continue to send in your questions, and we'll get them answered. So the first question is, our agency has around 40 years, been around for 40 years, and we are now starting to get into fundraising. My board is resistant to this. What will be a good starting point for them? Melissa?
I would start with any group with the stewardship piece, not the asking piece. Board members seem to really like making those calls, whether it's to major donors or to funders, where you just say thank you. And you're not asking for another gift. Sometimes people offer it, which is lovely. But I've seen it happen over and over where board members say, that wasn't so bad. Gee, what else can I do? And then you gradually step it up and you say, well, the next time you make a thank you call, then maybe you could say, could we count on you for your continuing support? And then they say, well, that wasn't so bad, and so forth. So you have this habituation process where they get more comfortable talking about money with the donors, either as a thank you piece and then eventually leading to the cultivation and the asking piece. So it's not, oh, you have to do it all at once. It's this gradual process. And then one of the things Shetty said earlier was an individual plan for each board member. So there might be some who are a little more comfortable, who'd be willing to start a little higher on the scale, if you will, and then others who really need a little more time. And there might be some people who develop into great advocates and spokespeople, and some people who always just want to make the thank you calls. As long as you have a range of talents on your board and interests, then that's okay. You have an individualized plan, and the people fulfill the commitments that they make to do their piece, and then everybody's participating. Is there anything
Great,
you'd add,
thank you,
Shetty?
Melissa. Yeah, I just wanted to add two things to that. One is something that I mentioned earlier, and that is to involve the board right from the beginning of the process, so to take them into a case for support, maybe doing it over a one-day retreat, really getting them excited and motivated and clear on what it is that your organization, why you exist, what's your purpose, what are your strategies, what are your goals, what impact are you having on the community, maybe even inviting in some of the program side of the organization to do presentations, inviting in clients, really getting the board members jazzed and excited. I've done this many times, and the board then is really ready to go out and make a difference, as Melissa said, valuing all the different ways that they can do that. Each individual board member can make a contribution, and to value that, not to only value the people who are willing to stand at the front lines. And then one thing to add to that stewardship call as a possibility, even as a little mini project for the board, is, we have all these foundations that we are already partnered with. How are those foundations finding this relationship? And actually not in a formal survey method or a formal focus group, but give the board members a bit of a script that will help them begin to have conversations with foundations, thanking them, but also having conversations with them about the foundation itself, about their experience as a partner with the not-for-profit organization that they're a board of, and so forth, so that they start to be in the types of conversations that Melissa showed you, the kinds of scripts where they're talking about, they're having an interaction about the issue, they're having an interaction about what the service is, the impact, as well as about the funder, the foundation's interests, and coming to a greater understanding and starting to have those in a very relaxed manner by doing it with somebody who's already giving. So that's what I wanted to add to that. The next question is, can you briefly discuss how the process differs from major gift solicitation? I think, Melissa, this question is coming out of a comment you made that I think was very important, that the foundation fundraising interaction with the board is very different than the major gift interaction between board members and potential major donors.
Sure. The major gift solicitations that I've been involved with, the volunteer, the board member, is saying, I've already made my commitment, and I'd like you to join me as a donor to this organization. There's some part of the cultivation process where the board member's involved, but many times the cultivation process is actually with the staff, the CEO, maybe with program staff, the major donor comes to events, that kind of thing. And then the board member's sort of the deal closer, if you will, and is often mentioning how he or she has already supported the organization. Not necessarily a dollar amount, but sometimes. It's sort of flipped from the foundation side. When you're working with a board member to give you access or to signal with a foundation funder, you're asking the board member to be part of the cultivation process, the early stages, and then the deal is actually between the staff of the two organizations, or in some cases the staff and the foundation board members. So the initial conversations are the board member and another board member, or board member and the staff person about how great the organization is and all the work that it's doing. And then the actual request comes from the staff side, and the terms of the grant are then negotiated. So it's a kind of I see them as inverse, one on the other. Again, Shetty, you have a lot of experience in this, and your viewpoint is always beneficial. Do you have ideas to add?
Thanks, Lois. Yeah, I just it's really just to underline something that you said, and that is that the staff is working with the program officer at the foundation, if there is one, or the staff at the foundation. And I just wanted to emphasize that point that you made and say that it's very, very important, though you're using your board to access the foundation, that you're doing signaling and accessing and the cultivation and all of that, for the program officers to not feel like you're trying to circumvent them, that you are aware that there is a process in place, that the foundations have a responsibility to be fair and to take into account all the various not-for-profits who may be connecting with them, and that you also understand that you have due diligence to do in terms of providing information, in terms of demonstrating the value of your organization and what you're doing for the community, or in terms of addressing an issue or filling a gap in service, and that you don't think that your connection or your access to the foundation somehow lets you off the hook for all of that. I think that's a very important aspect to mention as well. And and sometimes on the personal side, on the major gift side type of ask, when you're involving the board, individuals make their donation based on slightly different criteria than a foundation does. A foundation has all these formal processes and all that I already talked about. Research shows that individuals want to make sure that they that there's legitimacy to what it is that the not-for-profit is doing. They want to feel that, that somebody has checked them out and it's all, above board and kosher and all of that. But they're not as focused on impact as a foundation is. So it's important to keep that distinction as well between the kinds of asks that you would be doing, utilizing, going directly with the proposal, as opposed to going with major gifts, where it's a much more personal, a slightly different focus in terms of what it is that each group is looking for. So it's very, very important to keep those distinctions so that you're keeping your conversation at the right level and pointed in the right direction. So I hope that answers the person's question. The next question is, many of our board members are employees of other similar not-for-profit organizations. How do we ask them to make connections, share resources, when they're already using these connections, resources to benefit their not-for-profit employer? This is an interesting question. Melissa?
Well, you can ask for information. Do you know the names of the program officers? But you're right, it's a conflict of interest for them to approach a funder on your behalf or a donor on your behalf if their salary comes from the other organization. There are some circumstances where you have to have a large percentage of similar organizations represented on your board, but to the extent possible, I would suggest considering some other individuals to include on your board. It doesn't have to be people of wealth, as Shetty said. It can be, but people who have other types of connections in the community who can speak on your behalf, whether they're in the private sector or sometimes even in the government sector, can be a way to help strengthen your board's fundraising capacity.
Yeah, I would add to that as, sorry, Melissa, did I interrupt you? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was coming to a stop because I was out of an idea there.
Okay. I wanted to add to that you can also, your situation is complex, but you can add it to, make it an advantage. In that, I know that often when this situation is, as you've described it, where you have employees and board members across a sector and many other not-for-profit organizations, is there anything that you're doing together? Are there any partnerships possible between these not-for-profit organizations? Is there a way for you to help each other and not see each other as being in conflict or in competition, but actually working towards similar goals and being able to help each other in that way, if nothing other than brainstorming but they may even be actually projects and things like that you may be able to go to foundations together on. So just a thought, not knowing the specifics of your organization, but can you look at it from that perspective of partnership rather than conflict and see if there's any opportunities there? Next question. You mentioned a report on how foundations prefer to be contacted. How can this be accessed once available? Melissa, this is a report that you're working on for us here at Metasoft. Go ahead. Right,
and I don't know the distribution plan at this point. The report is still in a draft form, so if you watch the Metasoft, the Foundation Search website, you have the email list of all the participants, right? So there's probably a way
we do. I believe the way that we're going to distribute this report is it's going to be given to members of Foundation Search and Big Online, which are our two foundation databases. The other thing I should mention to you is we just, the webinar previous to this one in this same series was a webinar called What Foundations Want, Inside Intelligence on Grant Makers. That's now available as a recording to purchase for $59, and it is based on a report done by Hope Consulting with GuideStar and the Gates Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation, called Money for Good. So you can Google Money for Good and look for that report. I'm guessing that you'll be able to find something there, and it's fairly widely distributed. As well as I said, you can pick the recording. We had Greg Ulrich, who was the leader of that research in that webinar. And then once we have a clear idea of how we're distributing the report that Melissa is working on for us, I'll be happy to make a commitment to email everybody on this call today, on everybody who participated in this webinar, even if you're not here today, and send you the links and how you can go about getting access to that report. So I'll commit to doing that for you. Next question. So when you say starting them with stewardship piece, are thank you calls the best starting point, or would thank you visits be more or less appropriate?
Thank you calls are easier to schedule. Thank you visits are much more gracious. And part of it will depend upon, of course, the level of support that you receive from any one funder, how much time you can invest, you and your board member as a volunteer can invest in developing that relationship. In some communities, it makes a lot of sense to make a thank you visit because everybody knows everybody, and you see each other at Rotary or whatever. And in other situations, the funder might be across the country, in which case it would look like a misuse of resources to make a thank you visit. So it's a judgment call. But I do think funders appreciate the opportunity to speak with board members and to hear about what the organization is doing in a less formal context, however that comes about.
Yeah, and I also want to mention, one of the things that you're wanting your board to get comfortable with is social events and interacting at social events with the purpose of cultivating foundations. So don't forget that that's a possible opportunity as well. Rather than you going to visit them, is actually having an event, a thank you event, something low-key, something where you can present the impact, socialize, and get your board socializing with foundations. I don't know, this is again a judgment call in terms of where the foundations are, how close you are to them, not only geographically but in terms of social connection, and would that be an appropriate way to thank them, is to invite them to some kind of presentation or low-key social event. So just another, and that can also be an opportunity to train your board members in interacting socially as well as purposely at the same time. So question here, you mentioned the idea of gamification on a board, constructing opportunities for internal competition. What sort of metrics would you suggest as the basis for games? Is it too crass to suggest that the board reward whoever does the most X, Y, or Z? Melissa?
I've heard different ideas. Now, a crass is a judgment, right? Here are some of the ideas I've heard. Dividing the board up into teams, and each team has a certain set of responsibilities. So not how much do you raise or how many contacts have you made or anything, but where each team's responsibilities are defined. And then either how quickly do you fulfill those responsibilities with the appropriate feedback and information, or which team gets the most of its responsibilities completed in a certain period of time. So, if you did it month by month, then you'd want to know that each team was doing it on a month-by-month basis. They were fulfilling 90% of the responsibilities they accepted for that month. So that's one way to do. Responsibilities might be making thank you calls. They might be attending social events and talking about the organization. They might be actually finding 2 or 3 potential family foundations in the community that the organization can look at. You can frame the responsibilities any way you want, but it's not about the money. It's about supporting the process, because the competition in money it's too fraught with peril to set it up that way. So that's one thing I've heard of. Another thing is that each individual board member, rather than teams, each individual board member has certain commitments that he or she will fulfill, and they report out, not in a gamesmanship way, but they report they're held accountable at board meetings for their progress toward those commitments. So yes, I said I was going to call John, and I haven't done it yet. But that's part of one of the things that I've heard that organizations do as well, And Shetty, I'm sure you have some perspectives on this one.
Yeah, as you said, crass is definitely a judgment, and you need to look at your own board and your organization and make sure whatever you're doing is appropriate to the sensibilities and the values and so on of your organization and the people that you are actually working with. But I want to say that, in terms of rewarding, that there are lots and lots of ways to reward people, that it's not just money. In fact, money can be demotivating, and it's not always the best way to actually show somebody that you value what their contribution has been. One of the biggest ways is simple acknowledgement, simply letting everybody know, hey, Joe had to make a number of phone calls. He was, he had some trepidation, but he got on the phone and he really called everybody, and he's moving the process along and for everyone by doing what he's done. Something as simple as that, sending out thank yous, even added responsibility. Somebody has been, you've been doing thank you calls, you've done so well with that, we'd really like to ask you to be involved in this other way as well, or maybe we want to put you on this committee or so forth. You've got to judge it, obviously, based on the people, but as I say, be creative in terms of your ways of rewarding, and stay away, I think, away from money, and looking at it really as how do I motivate these people. I also think that it's important to socialize around the idea of fundraising. So you may have special dinners or special get-togethers that are just for the people who are working on fundraising, the board members who are working on fundraising, and make them fun. Don't make the whole occasion just about the fundraising. Make some of it that, of course, is an important component of it, but make it fun. Give them an opportunity to socialize, talk, share war stories, share their triumphs, get each other excited. You can even do with your teams some team building opportunities, like get together one afternoon and play baseball, kind of tournaments, or basketball, or badminton, whatever is appropriate for your organization, and build in some sort of fun social team building opportunities, and make it fun. Don't worry too much about the fact that these are adults. And so, that's too childish for them. No, if it's fun and it's engaging, and it gives everybody an opportunity to be together and help each other move, work for the organization, then go ahead, and just and then I'd say the last part of that is really how you communicate what's happening. Is very, very important. So you can have a great message, but not communicate it well, not present it in a way that's motivating, and then not succeed because of that. So really look at your communication. Know that at every step of the way, you've got to be both engaging your board and motivating them. And so that's your key. It's like being, when you're a sales manager, you aren't the one who's actually making the sales. You're making the sales through somebody else. How do you do that? How do you manage people in that way? And this is what your role is. It's a challenging role. It's more challenging than being a sales manager because, as I said, you're managing from behind, because these are actually the leaders of our organization that we're managing. But I think it's very doable and actually can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do want to add one more thing,
Sure.
Which is that let people know how the process proceeds. So if they made the introduction, then you say, well, Ann made the introduction, and we've now submitted a proposal. And then when you get the award of funding, which I know you will, you say, Ann made this connection for us, and I really want to thank her, and we've now received the award, so that Ann knows that, and everybody else knows, that Ann's introduction was instrumental in that process. So that's again part of the coding thing, to keep track over time how that happens, so you can make those acknowledgments in a public way, whether it's with your other board members or around taking coffee or whatever, so people see the whole process.
Okay, great. Thank you for that addition. Next question. I worry about disengaging my busy board members by giving them too much work or too many meetings. The balance is tough. Has research given a magic number, as in foundations every 3 months, of how often the board meets, is contacted, updated, and so on?
I have not done that research, and I have not checked with BoardSource to see if they have. They would probably be the source I'd check. That might be one that, if Fanny reminds me, I can maybe see if we can answer in the follow-up by email.
Okay. Okay. If you would, Melissa, that would be great, and we'll include that if there's anything there. And I would say personally, from my experiences, it really varies from board to board. I've been a consultant, so I've had, and Melissa has as well, so we've had an opportunity to work with many types of organizations and organizations of different sizes as well. And it really varies, and it really varies by community, how you balance this. I think it's great that you have an eye to it, and that you are doing your best not to burn your board out or disengage them, as you phrase it. So it's great that you have an eye on it,